floods, plagues, fire and brimstone. The Bible is packed with legendary punishments inflicted by a vengeful God. These tales of death and destruction may not only be written in mankind's past, but its future.
The modern world is still subject to just the same kinds of catastrophes that you might have read about in the Bible.
But if we are to face God's wrath again, it may be a lot worse. Imagine if our world became transformed by a punishing storm. A worldwide deluge sends an avalanche of water cascading through the skyscraper canyons of New York. A cataclysmic flood that sweeps over Asia and washes away the great capitals of Europe. From space, an unimaginable picture. One massive ocean completely covering the entire planet. Could this great flood be part of our own future? A catalog of catastrophe fills the pages of the Bible. A closer look reveals a number of real natural disasters that could have inspired the biblical tales. Ones that are still some of the biggest threats facing us today. The question remains whether or when they're coming again.
These types of things still resonate today. And in part, it's because people read the Bible as if they're in it. So the natural catastrophes in the Bible still strike a chord today, and people are still perhaps a little scared or wondering if maybe it might not happen again.
Genesis chapter 6, verse 17. And I, behold, I do bring the flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. From under heaven, everything that is in the earth shall perish. In Genesis, the first book of the Bible, God creates the entire universe in 6 days and destroys it within 10 pages.
God is sending the flood to punish mankind because humans have become corrupt, they've become evil, and he's basically starting over. Wants to get rid of everybody, wants to wash those humans right out of his hair.
Approximately 7,000 years ago, an ancient flood is thought to have swept the Black Sea region, covering approximately 100,000 square kilometers of land. Could this have inspired the story of God's watery wrath? The Black Sea lies north of Turkey and is connected to the Mediterranean by a thin channel of water called the Bosphorus Strait. But in 1998, 2 geologists proposed that this channel did not always exist.
According to the hypothesis, at a time about 8,000 years ago, waters from the Mediterranean catastrophically inflooded into the Black Sea basin. When the natural dam at the Bosphorus finally broke, the entire world's oceans were pushing water into the Black Sea basin.
This hypothesis, known as the Black Sea Deluge, proposes that a gigantic volume of salt water from the Mediterranean flooded into the Black Sea with catastrophic results. For the people populating the Black Sea basin, it was a disaster that could have only been interpreted as divine rage.
It would have been much like Niagara Falls, but probably 20 times in magnitude because of the volume of water that needs to flow through this area to fill into this basin.
In 2000, oceanographer Dwight Coleman and his team began to map the bottom of the Black Sea, looking for evidence of the flood.
So what we're looking at here is using visualization software, and we're able to fly around in here and basically follow the path that the rising sea level would have taken as it flowed into the Black Sea.
The channel cut by the salt water reveals the severity of the deluge.
It's quite clear that there was a very deep channel that was cut as this water flowed across the bottom of the Black Sea. So that indicates to me that there was a very large volume of water that was flowing, and that it was flowing at a very high velocity.
The faster the current, the more devastating the flood. But ultimately, it was the discovery of freshwater shells in the saltwater Black Sea which offered concrete proof of the flood.
7,400 years ago, we have freshwater mollusks growing in the Black Sea. This shell actually does prove that at one point in the past, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake. And then from about 6,900 years ago is about the date of the oldest saltwater shell. So sometimes during that 500-year span is when that change occurred.
This cataclysmic event changed the landscape forever. It's science now. It was terrifying then.
We think that there was perhaps thousands of people living around the shores of the Black Sea at the time of the flooding event, and all those people were then displaced as a result of this flood.
For the primitive agricultural people who were living along the shores of the Black Sea before that, this would have been just an unbelievable sight. It would have seemed like it was indeed a world flooding event.
But what could have caused the Mediterranean waters to rise so high that they flooded into the freshwater Black Sea? Scientists theorize it all began during the last ice age.
The world looked a lot different during the last ice age. First of all, there was an ice sheet like the one on Greenland, about 2 miles thick, that reached as far south as Chicago and New York, and stretched all the way across the continent. So that's a lot of ice.
But from about 11,500 years ago, the Earth began to grow warmer, and melting ice needs somewhere to go.
We obviously lost that 2 mile thick Laurentine ice sheet. It basically dissolved, melted away. All that water went into the ocean, and the oceans rose a couple hundred feet.
The landmass that separated the Mediterranean and the Black Sea couldn't hold back the extra water. When the levee broke, the world was transformed. And this world-changing event could happen again.
Our climate changes are happening in a geologic instant. The ice caps are melting fast, and we've been measuring them with these satellites that measure the lost mass of these massive ice sheets on Greenland and Antarctica, and these ice losses seem to be speeding up.
This melting ice could cause sea levels to dramatically rise once again.
Remember, just that first 3 feet of sea level rise would create 100 million refugees from coastal areas, disrupting not just where people live, but the entire course of civilizations and societies.
Experts believe a complete loss of both the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets would raise sea levels by over 200 feet. No natural force could unleash that kind of mass meltdown overnight. But if these sheets were to disappear, our planet would be transformed into the ultimate water world.
If we get to the point where both Greenland and Antarctica have melted, then we're talking about a radically different place. That's kind of the Al Gore scenario, with New York wiped off the map, the entire eastern seaboard reconfigured. You know, we're all living kind of on the coastline that was once the Appalachian Mountains. It's a vastly different world.
After the Great Flood, the Bible says that God promises never to wipe out life on earth again. But today, with a variety of cataclysmic disasters waiting in the wings, we cannot be so sure it won't happen, one way or another. If a few of the Bible's 10 plagues were to happen in our world today, it might look like this. A crimson-colored tide assaults the waters around Manhattan, turning the Hudson and East Rivers into tributaries of blood. Thousands of frogs take over downtown. High above, a dense black cloud hovers over the skyline. Huge swarms of locusts are circling the city, looking to devour anything they can. How would we respond to this cascade of catastrophe spiraling out of control?
The modern world is still subject to just the same kinds of catastrophes that you might have read about in the Bible. We still have plagues, we still have earthquakes, we still have all manner of massive storms, and they are still very, very disruptive to our way of life. But if the world today were suddenly being bombarded by one kind of cataclysm after the next, it's a little hard to imagine exactly how we would hold up.
Through the 10 plagues, God sets out to destroy an empire in order to free a people. The Israelites are the slaves of Egypt, and the Almighty wants them released. But the Pharaoh is not about to give up on free labor.
Pharaoh's not so willing to let the Israelites go, and it becomes basically a showdown between God and the Egyptians through these 10 plagues. And each time the plagues happen, they seem to get worse and worse and more destructive.
Exodus chapter 7, verse 17. I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and it shall turn into blood, and the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink of the water of the river.
We're told with the first plague that all the water turns to blood. So it's not just the Nile River, which of course is a significant river for the Egyptians, but it's all the drinking water as well.
Rotting fish carcasses, blistering heat, no